and recognise the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islands people who are participating. So I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their cultures on the lands and the waters of Australia. So just a little bit about SIMNA. We are a growing learning network of members who really believe that understanding and measuring social impact is important to make sure that we do the best we can for all Australians and the environment. So we come together to learn, to share knowledge, and to meet like-minded people. And what we're trying to do is build a really diverse network. So interested people, funders, practitioners, non-profit leaders, everyone's involved in the often quite complex and all the different pieces of what we do. So glad you could join us today. I'm now going to pass over to Ellie, who's from our Western Australian committee, who's going to kick off the webinar.
Thank you, Kathy. First, mute, unmute, exciting thing for the day. I would also, thanks. So I would also like to say, Nan Kardich Nija Nungamort. I acknowledge that I'm over here in Western Australia on Wajak Noongar land, and also pay my respects to their elders past, present and future leaders. As Kathy mentioned, this is the 4th webinar in the SIMNA series. And I'm really excited about the panel that we have for you today, and the discussion that we're going to have on social technology and social impact measurement. Before we start, I'll do a little bit of housekeeping. You will have seen when you came in the room, everybody should be on mute. I ask if you can stay on mute through the whole session. Fantastic. And at the same time, we would love for you to send through your questions to us using the chat box. And the lovely Desiree Nangle from Mercycare, give us a wave, Des. She's there, might not come up on people's screens. She'll be going through the questions for us today. We're a panel of 5 and we've got an hour, so we'll try our best to get through as many of those questions as possible. But if your question doesn't get answered, feel free to reach out to our panelists directly. The session is already also being recorded, and you'll see that there was a little pop-up that came up earlier to indicate that. So feel free to post the questions to everyone, or if you feel uncomfortable posting the question to the group, just feel free to send the question in directly to Des. Before I hand over to the panel to introduce themselves, here's our lovely panel of speakers. I just wanted to give a bit of a background about my thinking of the panel today, and why I thought it would be a great topic for us across the network to discuss. So really this panel today kind of came from my own curiosity at the intersection really of technology for social good and the use of data science to kind of really address these complex problems, and how we can kind of bring social impact measurement into that. This is our panel. We've got a great panel of fantastic speakers lined up. And really kind of what these guys have in common is that they're really using or engaging with technology to make the world a better place. So without further ado, I will hand over to our panelists, and I will, there we go, stop sharing my screen so you can see their faces, to introduce themselves, starting with Emma.
Thanks so much, Ellie. Thanks everyone for having me. So I'm Emma Koster out here on Wurundjeri country in Melbourne, heavily locked down Melbourne, unfortunately. And I'm the founder of Hello Cass, which is an anonymous SMS-based chatbot to help provide pathways to information and support for people affected by family or sexual violence. Brevity is not my strong suit, so I'm going to quickly pass it back to you, Ellie, before I keep banging on.
Thank you, Emma. Next up, we have Leah Watkins.
Hi, my name's Leah. I work on the 50 Lives, 50 Homes project in Perth. So like Ellie, I'm currently on Wajak Land, and I'd like to do a particular shout out. I just flicked through and noticed my colleague Priscilla from Melbourne is on the call. So we work on very, very similar stuff on using technology to use the by name list to try and end homelessness in our community.
Great, thanks, Leah. Next up, we have Kyle.
Hi everyone, my name is Kyle. I'm the founder of Pearlii. We've developed a machine learning algorithm that scans photos of your teeth, which you upload with your smartphone camera, and we check for dental problems for free. So it's free dental checkups. Thanks, very happy to be here.
Thanks, Kyle, and over to you, Kate.
Hey everyone, so my name's Kate Kirwin. I'm the founder of She Codes. So we run programs to upskill women in tech. So our goal is to inspire and upskill 100,000 women across the country by 2025, which is pretty ambitious. So I'm in Perth in Western Australia as well, and we're working really trying to connect that industry with education. So we're working with industry partners like BHP and other big corporates to give them access to talent, while also providing a social good of getting more diversity and getting better jobs for women in the ecosystem. That's me.
Thanks, Kate. And last but no means least, we have Ben Hawthorn.
Thanks, Ellie. Hi, everyone. I'm over here in Western Australia on Wajak land, and just like to pay my respect to elders past, present, and future and emerging leaders. I work for Ruah, and I work with Leah and Ellie at Ruah Community Services, which provide mental health services, family domestic violence services, and housing homelessness services. And I've had a bit of a diverse background, I guess, working in everything from engineering, sustainability, through to aged care and now in the community services space. But I'm here today more to, I guess, talk about my experience working on establishing the organisation called Suits Me. Suits Me, I'll talk about it in more detail as we go along, but in short, it's basically an app-based NDIS service provider that specialises in mental health services, so not broader disability services, and really is trying to enable choice and control in the true sense of those words through the technology. So I'll leave it there, but I'll talk a bit more about that later.
Fantastic. Okay, let's go. First up, with our first question. Which is to our panel, what technology are you using for social good and what is that helping you to achieve? So first up, that question to Kate.
Cool. So like I was mentioning before, so we're kind of coming at this from a slightly different angle, using technology as an education platform. So we're teaching people how to code, we're teaching them how to be developers, and using that to create pipelines for talent and giving them opportunities to grow into industry. So we know that statistics show that 70% of the fastest growing occupations are going to require some level of technical skills, and that we're going to need 200,000 more people who work in tech in the next 5 years as a nation for us to be able to be globally competitive. So there's a huge discrepancy in diversity in tech. A lot of the stereotypes that you're probably all thinking right now when we're talking about technology, there's a certain kind of person that you'll probably have in mind. And we know that we're not going to be able to get to those numbers of people in technology if we're really limiting the scope of who can be in tech. So giving people opportunities, giving them confidence, giving them the actual skills to be able to move into tech and to kind of participate in that world And there's a huge bunch of other benefits as well. So building better products when you've got diversity, teams are normally safer, they're normally more fun, and we have a different way of thinking about things, which I think is super interesting when we're looking at this measuring space, because if women or people from a different diverse background have a different way of thinking about things, they're going to end up with a different solution and possibly looking at different aspects of the problem that may be overlooked otherwise.
Thanks, Kate. That's great. And same question to Kyle.
What technology we're using? Machine learning, more specifically image processing, to scan photos looking for dental problems. It's helping us to achieve this, overcome some of the biggest barriers. I'd love if people put in the chat group how long it's been since their last dental checkup. In Australia, 2/3 of adults haven't been to the dentist in the last 2 years, so it's a big public health problem. Cost is the biggest barrier. Time, it's really inconvenient to go to the dentist. Access, and fear and distrust. Pearlii is free, it's available 24/7, you can do it anywhere. And hopefully it helps you overcome some of those fears and the distrust you have with your dentist.
Thanks, Kyle. Same question to Emma.
Thanks, Ali. So Hello Cass is a chatbot, so it's driven by SMS primarily. And the reason we've kind of decided on this fairly old school application of technology is for accessibility. So wanting to make sure, did I draw that on the screen? I'm sure I didn't, fidgeting. Wanting to make sure that people in remote and regional areas could also access this service. And like Kyle, I guess one of the key parts of this technology is really looking at overcoming barriers. So barriers to disclosure. We know around 1/3 of incidents of violence, whether it be family violence or sexual violence, are only 1/3, are reported or disclosed. So fear, shame, stigma, location, language, these are all kind of some of the barriers that people face when trying to access that information. So by making something anonymous and really discreet via text, also web and also WhatsApp, is what we're working with to try and help overcome these barriers.
Whoops, sorry everybody, I was trying to do the snazzy spacebar trick on my mute, but it backfired. Next up, we have Leah.
Hi, so I'm going to answer the question opposite way around. So the problem we're trying to solve is we want to end homelessness, particularly for very vulnerable rough sleepers. And the methodology we're trying to use is particularly around this by name list, because the idea is that you can only end rough sleeping for people if you know them by name and you know enough about them. So rather than relying on old data, you're using near real-time data. The technology that we're using to do that is the lovely people at Micro Projects have built it into an Office 365 environment. So the idea is rather than a single organisation trying to solve a problem with a single piece of system that they're working on, it goes across multiple organisations in the sector. So we can attack like a hive mind and use everyone's resources on this very complex problem.
Great, and over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Ellie. I quite like the way you did that, Leah, so I'm going to do the same. So Suits Me, as I mentioned before, are a registered NDI service provider, like many of those sorts of service providers out there, and we focus on providing social and community participation. But the real problem we wanted to tackle with this is, I guess, trying to offer choice and control in the real sense of allowing clients to be able to choose the workers that they want, when those workers come to visit them, being able to have supports offered over the weekend, in the evening, and all of these things, many organisations have not been able to offer those within the price point that the NDIS insurance scheme pays. So our kind of, I guess, problem that we wanted to address was being able to offer all of that choice and control while still having a viable model. The sorts of feedback we were getting from clients that had been receiving services elsewhere was the sort of thing: why do I have to wait till 9 a.m. on a Monday morning to make a phone call to cancel an appointment that's starting at 9:30 a.m. Just because the call centre only opens then? Why can't I just hit a button and app and cancel it over the weekend and reduce the anxiety that I have to go through thinking about making that phone call all weekend? So we've basically got a native app solution in Apple at the moment. It's been released in Android in about 3 weeks' time, and really it just, without going into all the details, allows clients to choose the workers based on their profiles, based on their availability, based on the time that they want them. It allows them to interact with the workers via the app, communicate with them, and allows them to manage their funding and track their goals, and all do that within an environment that has been designed around clients' needs. So that's it in a nutshell, I guess.
Great, thanks, Ben. So, Des, how are we going for questions from the audience?
So I only have a couple questions so far. Should I go ahead and start with one?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so anyone on the panel, what software or tech tools do you use for outcomes measurement or outcomes frameworks if you do measure them?
I can answer for ours. So our stuff is all about outcomes because there's no point doing anything unless it makes a difference. So it's all built in the Office 365 environment, and that data then comes into Power BI. So it's not anything fancy or very complicated stuff, but it is counting across a multiple range of data points to be able to track, is homelessness going up or down? Are people returning to homelessness from housing, or where they're coming from, all those sorts of things.
I'll jump in after that, Leah. So we've built our own technical stack in HelloCAS. So with that, we also have just a data insights dashboard. It's pretty like 0.1 in terms of versions, I think, at the moment. So HelloCAS, I should just say, it's live for Victoria only at the moment, and it's been live for about a year. But certainly looking to build our own data insights platform for measurement is part of our next big piece of development. Yeah.
I'll go next. We've got a lot of work to do around measuring our impacts. We've only just, like last week, closed our seed round. So we're about to be hiring a lot. If you download the Pearlii app, forgive me, it's a beta. It's pretty basic, but it did enough to show the investors, hey, give us a shot, and now we're doing it properly. So in about 3 or 4 months, we'll be releasing the one we've been dreaming of. In that, we'll be measuring obviously the number of checkups, the number of people that follow through and get the treatment they need. Our dream is to run a series of social good projects, like pop-up clinics out back, particularly in Indigenous communities. I've done a lot of work there as an epidemiologist. And we have this crazy idea of selling teeth whitening kits through the Pearlii app, and all profits from those will go towards those social good projects.
Great. Any more questions, Des, or shall we move on to our next question to the panel, which I think will explore that first question in more detail?
So the only other question I have is the one that was being discussed back and forth in the chat. I don't know if the panel members had a chance to see it, so I will pose it to you. I got some internal feedback from participants listening, which was exciting, which is, does anyone have experience using technology to engage with community members in rural and remote communities, whereas before you might go there and yarn face to face?
I can jump in. So we've been running programs and workshops in the Perth metro area for about 5 years. I was born in Karratha in the Pilbara. I spent most of my high school years down in Bunbury in the southwest of Western Australia. So I understand what country is like. I've still spent most of my life in the city, but I definitely do understand what country life is like. And something that's been really important to me in how we grow she goats is how do we give those opportunities to those areas that really need them. Particularly now, like a lot of the regional hubs in Western Australia are mining hubs that have really good internet now, with resource companies investing in the towns that they're working in Geraldton being so close to the square kilometre array. Like there's some very cool stuff happening in our regions, but that digital literacy barrier is scary for a lot of people. So we've been running workshops across Western Australia in regional areas for the last probably 2 years. And we're doing an online program in South Australia in a couple of weeks that I'm hopefully excited to be able to get some people joining us from regional South Australia. And then in Queensland as well, we've been doing some stuff in Brisbane at the moment, but I think there's some very cool opportunities in regional areas in Queensland. But our model up until about 4 months ago was we would go to a place and we would run a workshop, which when we're going to Port Hedland or Karratha or Newman, sorry, anyone who's not in Western Australia, they're really small places and they're really far away and it's very expensive to get there because you're competing with mining flights. So we could go there, but it would be several $1,000s just in flights and accommodation and people's time to run a program. We have, like the rest of the world, had to pivot really, really quickly in the last couple of months of how do we run education workshops while we can't go places. And we've been doing online programs, and it actually has been very, very cool because we can reach people in broader areas and people can do things from their house, and on an education level actually hasn't been as hard as I had thought. Still challenging, don't get me wrong, but there are still opportunities and people I think have really leaned into that in the last couple of months. We ran something in Geraldton fully online with our teachers in Perth and our students in Geraldton a couple of weeks ago, and the outcomes were not too dissimilar to how we would do things in a face-to-face environment. So I'm quite excited about what the next sort of 12 to 18 months look like while people have had to learn how to do all of this stuff online in the last few weeks or months, some at varying degrees of success. But now that we've proven that we can do things online, like how do we provide those opportunities to be able to do more and support people in those areas without having to spend $2,000 chartering a plane to some faraway place?
I think, like Kate, I've also noticed that COVID's taught us to do things that we didn't think otherwise. So because we were all sent home into isolation, it actually didn't matter that I was in a shed in Bayswater and someone was thousands of miles away. They were as close as the person in the next suburb. So it actually made people feel a little bit more connected, quite oddly. And that was some of the feedback in our organisation from our staff, is that they felt a lot more connected, even though they were all working at home. We also had some very interesting feedback from some of the people that we support and some of the young people in particular around they would maybe choose to do some of the stuff online that they used to do in person, like particularly things like where they might be attending a case conference. And normally that's a really intimidating experience where you're in a room with all these social workers and adults, and changing that to experience where I'm a big person, you're all these little tiny people on the screen and I can mute you. It just shifts the power a little bit for people to think I can control this environment a little bit more and I don't have to go into their space. I can sit comfortably on my own. So that's also some interesting feedback we've had.
Anybody else want to come in on that question?
I haven't had so much experience, I guess, in that context for Australia, but just doing some scoping work for a pilot across the Pacific. It's been interesting to look at how different regions use technology differently. So in Tonga, the preference there is like looking at how can we make sure the WhatsApp version of Hello Cass is, or a Hello Cass kind of Tongan version is the focus. But in PNG, we deliberately avoid Facebook for privacy reasons, but Facebook is free across PNG. There's no cost for the data, so it's a hugely popular platform for across Papua New Guinea. So yeah, it's very localized is what we've worked out in each kind of region.
I think on that, I think it's sort of, you've got to get your audience where they're at, right? So when we've been running our workshops online, like you can't make assumptions on what technology they've used before or what level of familiarity they are. I definitely think that it's possible. You just have to find your audience where they're at, figure out what platform works for them, and then maybe be a bit more intentional in how we spend the time on, is it spending the first 30 minutes of the class running through how to use Zoom so that everyone feels very, very comfortable for the next rest of the day, or making sure that they're on Facebook being the platform that they already use, rather than trying to turn up and do something that works in a metro environment or a different country environment, just finding them where they're at and working around that.
That's great. And on that note, let's dive into our next question to the panel, which will explore these journeys with social impact measurement a little bit further. So to the panel, how do you understand social impact measurement? And what do you think are the opportunities to bring social impact measurement into the design and use of the technologies that you're working with? And over to Emma to answer that question first.
Oh, how do I understand social impact measurement? Kind of loosely, I have to confess. I feel like every time I write a proposal, I find myself like Googling, like, is there anything that's kind of developed? And I've like taken my finger off the pulse and missed. Look, I think it's really challenging because, and I'll use obviously Hello Cass, the context of looking at family violence, sexual violence, and ultimately it's a behaviour change piece, which is very long term. So that's hard to measure and hard to satisfy kind of funders' requirements. So what we're trying to do, and this is like an active, like it's a live thing that we're working on, is kind of separate metrics around user engagement and kind of product efficacy. So we've sent over 7,000 messages, and whilst that's a good number and people like to hear it, I know that, you know, some of that is not particularly helpful or impactful messaging. You know, some of those messages are me testing, some of them are other people testing, so it doesn't actually say much. So I think that's one of the, I'm super honest about those things, like that's one of the challenges that we have. So looking to measure, you know, that the impact in this kind of behavioural change context, it's really, I think part of it is looking at data really broadly and across the sector. So building relationships with other programs and providers to make sure we're kind of aggregating that kind of information. And also, I'll just finally say that because anonymity is such an important part of the product, and it's an important part of, you know, I guess the philosophy behind something like Hello Cass, making sure that we don't collect individuals' data, that also makes measuring really challenging because we don't follow up with individuals to be like, did you go and get that counselling service? What did you do there? And because, to be honest, it's not really, it's not within our remit, it's not part of our business. So we're trying to work out this level of abstraction in our data analysis, so we don't keep any user information, but we do get a sense of a user journey and a completion of, or how complete a user journey is through the app, which is, it's like, it's a live problem. It's just, it's ongoing. So yeah, I think to summarize that, I think it's important to kind of weigh up the importance of keeping users' agency as part of your product, but also, you know, how can you actually find meaningful information? I don't have an answer in the end.
Thanks, Emma. Same question to Kyle.
I think Emma nailed it. You need a mix of data. So I'm traditionally a quantitative researcher, but I'm really interested in a prevention first model of care. So we work in health. We want to see positive health outcomes, but I want to prevent disease. So we're going to be building a lot of educational content, gamification for kids, things like this. And I haven't done that yet, but now we have investment to do that. And this is a good reminder to build some sort of metrics to try and capture improvements in oral health literacy. So people learning about how to prevent diseases. It's going to be tricky. I can't add any more than that. I love the silence after you answer.
Thanks, Kyle. Same question to Leah.
I think for us, the really critical thing is about making sure you have a really clear aim. And whilst I might have earlier referred to homelessness as a wicked problem, it actually has a fairly simple solution because it's in the name. The moment someone has a home, they cease to be homeless. So everything measures around that. So be really clear about that aim. And then, so how do we measure whether or not people are housed? And how do we measure how effective we are at that? So underneath that single aim, you have a whole range of other little measures. So retention rates, length of time to be housed, how long does it take to do this, to do that, where people move in and out of the system. So it's about being able to track all of those little measures up to the next level measure and up to your final global aim, so that you know that all of the work is pushing in the same direction rather than pushing off into multiple directions. So that's how you know that you're getting that defined social impact. Using the technology to do that is about actually having, doesn't actually take masses of data points to be able to track that. It's about being able to cross-reference those data points. So I think there's 6 key data points that we measure around whether people are homeless, housed, inactive, returning from homelessness, returning from inactive, or new. And then you just, from that, can actually build up a picture of flow in and out of the system. So effectively, the qualitative stuff that you do when you map someone's journey, what the technologies enable us to do is to map multiple journeys of people all at once. So you can either drill into that one person's journey, or you can drill into what does everybody's journey look like, and then you can see the clunky bits and the stuck points in the system to be able to try and work out where should we direct our energy to unclog them.
Making it sound really, really simple there, Leah. Next up, same question, Kate.
Yeah, so we're pretty aware that, you know, what you don't track doesn't get measured. And I think on Leah's point, what is more important than figuring out about how technically to do it, it's being intentional around like why you're doing it and how you're setting it up in your systems to be able to, like, is this a data point that is interesting to me and am I going to do something about it, or am I just tracking it for the sake of tracking it? Is really the kind of things that we think about quite often. So for me, the most important metric for us is tracking people into jobs. So particularly for our longer programs, like are they getting job ready? Do they have opportunities to get into jobs, and where are those barriers? Is it on an education level? Is it a confidence level? Is it a market problem that is harder for me to solve? Where those barriers are and where we can provide support. But it's also not just about jobs. It seems like quite a flat line because it's about the whole person. So the things that we're not tracking very well at the moment that we're kind of looking at is how are we impacting confidence, how are we impacting potential opportunities for promotions and impacting their personal financial position through coming through upskilling education programs. So that's something that we're kind of looking at over the next sort of 12 months from here, is how do we track all of those softer social goals that do have an impact, but they aren't quite as black and white as has a job, doesn't have a job. So that's quite an interesting journey for us on a platform level. So I think my colleague Holly is somewhere on this call, who's done an amazing amount of work in Google Data Studio. So all of our stuff is on spreadsheets, which gets translated into snazzy graphs in Google Data Studio, so we can track feedback and we can track retention of people through programs and how much they're coming back, and those kinds of things. But it's definitely there's definitely still a space that we need for the conversations that are just really hard to track on a very vanilla metric level, is the sentiment and the stuff that people don't put in the survey. That's how they feel, and all of the other bits, the unintended positives of doing a program.
That's always a huge challenge. How do you measure people's really, small changes that are meaningful is always such a big challenge. So finally, or last but not least, same question to Ben.
Thanks, Ellie, and thanks. It was great listening to all those different responses. I think it really highlights the possibilities that tech-based social enterprises can offer in towards outcomes and social impact measurement. I also think it's interesting reflecting on where startup tech-based social enterprise are in their journey, and obviously that's going to directly correlate to some extent on how much they can achieve in the social impact measurement space. But certainly I think the other interesting thing is the difference between measuring outcomes for the individual versus trying to create systemic change, and some of the stuff that Leah and Emma were talking about. I think that those big data sets and looking at those trends are pretty exciting, and what we can do from a systemic point of view towards ending homelessness or ending family and domestic violence. In terms of Suits Me, we're very much, I guess, a little bit more like where Kyle's at in the early days of startup tech-based organisation, and much more focused on individual outcomes at this stage. And I think really the big difference that we see is the ability to measure outcomes in real time, high quality data, large volumes, and the frequency. So the big difference is that clients, when you traditionally capture data from clients, you either have to do a survey and the worker will go out and get them to fill it in, and there's a latency, there's a lag time. Whereas now, because the client is interacting directly through the application, all of a sudden it means access to real-time data. How are they using the application? What's the experience like with the application? How often are they cancelling their sessions? How well does the match of a worker to the client link to how well they achieve the goals? How well does achieving goals within the app and the visualization of those goals within the app link to improved outcomes over time? All of these questions we haven't answered yet, but certainly we're capturing this data, and I'm really excited to be able to draw on that big data set and the trends that it will hopefully offer to us over time, and then ultimately allow us to look at that data, measure the impact we're seeing of an individual's recovery journey, and try and identify what are those things that are working really well towards allowing them to have a better outcomes in their recovery journey. And I think that's where the real opportunity is for us, but certainly early days, and we've got a while to go yet before we can really make the most of that sort of outcomes measurement and those big data sets, and start to look at opportunities with AI and how that can be applied to improving the outcomes of the user cohort that we work with. So yeah, thanks. That's probably all I can think of at this stage to add.
Great summary, Ben, and it was fantastic hearing where you all are with respect to your different journeys with engaging social impact measurement. Okay, let's throw it over to the audience. Just stop sharing. Des, what questions have we got coming through?
Yes, so one to the panel members. Did you set a budget? Was it a long tender process for those of you who use developers, and did anyone go way over budget?
I'll jump in. So I come from a tech background, so I kind of had a budget of my savings, and then when I exhausted that, I was fortunate enough to receive an innovation fellowship from the Maya Foundation, which is 100 grand, or it's up to 130 now. If anyone's interested and has any ideas, it's getting juicier. And yeah, in terms of exceeding the budget, totally have definitely done that. But I think it's one of those things where you can also, when building software, it's, the MVP or minimum viable product could be a Google form. It could be the simplest version of your idea. And I always recommend that before you start to engage developers of any sort, you kind of test out your concept or your product or what it is that you're trying to achieve first. So rather than thinking about the app, because it might not be an app. HelloCast isn't a user app. It's a phone number or a web client or a WhatsApp number. So I think that's the best way of managing software or tech development budgets, to start as simply as you possibly can.
Just following on from Emma's points, you're all 100% correct. Don't invest too much money until you've got signs of product market fit. So I'm just coming at this from a startup point of view. You might come from a giant organization where this doesn't apply. Build as cheap as you can, as lean as you can, a very basic prototype, and look for signals as if that you might be solving a problem. For example, people are still using it even though it's crap and it's really buggy. If people are still using it and putting up with those bugs, you're probably onto something. If, in our case, we had hundreds of people complaining about our crappy app, I loved that. That means we're onto something. That is a good sign of product market fit. If they're taking the time to spend a few minutes to write you an email, it means you've got something they want. So do it as lean as you can, and then look for signs of product market fit.
You guys are like my people. It makes me so happy. I work with startups all the time, and so many people throw money at things expecting that the more money you throw at it, the better it'll work. And then spend tons of time and money on something that people don't want because they haven't asked. So you definitely need to ask your customer first. And like Emma was saying, there are so many ways that you can pen and paper something, spin something up on like a landing page, get a WordPress website happening, and you can fake it and pretend like you have something, just to test things until you actually decide how you want to build it. That's the best way to stay under those budgets. On a grant sort of level, I've applied for lots of grants before, and it does take a ton of time. So just be mindful that it takes a ton of time, and it usually takes me about 3 months to hear back on government grants if you've got them. So that can be quite difficult if you've got a thing that you're like, all right, I'm ready, I need to hit go, and then you're just in limbo for ages waiting for a response.
I was just going to add something to that. I think it's an interesting. I think you have to be careful about the whole lean startup approach when it comes to social impact. I think it's a balance between all the learnings that have come from the world of tech, everything out of Silicon Valley venture capital world, where the product market fit is absolutely critical. But I think at the same time, while there's absolute merit in going lean and going out and engaging with consumers and making sure there's a fit, I do think when you're trying to address some of these systemic challenges like ending homelessness and other areas where you're trying to achieve social impact, there sometimes might be reasons to approach things slightly differently. And I'm not saying I know what that is. I just think that I think it's always worth questioning things in a slightly different way that doesn't always have a heavily commercial mindset when you're looking to solve social issues. It's probably, yeah, it's a space that I still am yet to understand what the best approach is, but I've seen many fantastic opportunities for social impact not get off the ground because they couldn't find the funding, or because they couldn't demonstrate certain kind of, I guess, product market fit that you'd expect to see in a traditional kind of startup world. So I think that's an interesting space, and I don't know what the answer is.
Can I just add on to that? Sorry, Ben. Yeah, I agree. I mean, HelloCast is a not-for-profit simply because I incorporated it out of my for-profit company, but because I couldn't, in 2.5 years of developing it, couldn't find a business model that made sense in a for-profit way for such a vulnerable community. And I think that's something that's really important is, for me, the idea of profiting from people's trauma, I was like, I just can't find a way for me to be okay about this. So I'm going to go down the not-for-profit path, which a lot in the kind of traditional startup world kind of saw that decision as a bit of a fail. Like I just hadn't thought hard enough. And I was like, no, I'm pretty sure, like I've thought myself to like distraction over this. I just think that sometimes there isn't always a business model. And the way that I'm kind of shifting now, or hashtag pivoting, is to like look at how we can use the infrastructure that's powering HelloCast in a for-profit sense, but we keep all of the data and the content and the brand of HelloCast as not-for-profit, but white label that infrastructure and then make the not-for-profit a shareholder of the for-profit company, which is like the most insanely paperwork heavy way of doing anything. And for someone who can't keep track of that kind of stuff, seems insane. I will be getting a CEO as soon as I can, but that's, it's taken some time and thinking, and it's just what we're up to.
Great. Thanks everyone for that. So the next question is from Chris Lee, who's a member of an Impact 100 collective giving group. And he says, very few grant applicants convey their impact in an accessible way. And very few of the social return on investment statements are convincing enough when you actually read the details. But he does think nearly all applicants have a great story to tell. Does anyone have any experience or ideas with the technology available and how organizations can view and express their impact in persuasive ways without trying to measure and assess in more of a strict and rigid manner, which may lend itself more to the quantitative, I'm assuming?
I think for organisations, sometimes they need to be a bit brave and employ a few data nerds, because particularly in that social impact sector and the sector that I work in, people are used to anecdote, and the plural of anecdote isn't data, it's just more anecdotes. And we're used to telling stories, or if I can tell you what happens here, then that's a good outcome. And if you just employ people who come through that route and come through that social work or that other environment, you don't always get people who can think in that data way to add the quantitative stuff to that qualitative stuff. So you need both those elements in there. It's about making sure you invest a little bit in evaluation people, or people who can do or think at least like that.
I definitely feel like that's true in my situation. Like I'm all about the story and love a story. And I would love to read a testimonial and how they've gone through their journey. And it's really hard for me to turn that into a number. But a couple of my colleagues are much more like, okay, that's 5 people, that's 50%, and translate that story into something that is a sentence or a number. So I think it's about kind of manipulating your data for your audience, and being mindful of who's reading it. Are they someone that is going to want to go on that journey and that story with you? Or is it someone who's going to want a graph with a bunch of percentages and some data items?
I think also those percentages and data items also need the story attached to them as well. It's like, here's a pretty graph, this is what it's telling you, rather than just go, here's a pretty graph, read what you like into it. Because unless you have that sort of little bit of interpretive work, it's still just a graph that looks like it's going up, but it's not saying what people think it's saying.
Anyone else want to come in on that question? All right, next question, Des.
What technology tools would you suggest if you want to get an idea of the pulse of an issue in a local urban community using more real-time data rather than looking at census ABS data or council reports? So do you know of any data sites where people can go to get more real-time data?
I do.
You go.
No, sorry. There's a platform called Neighborlytics, but I think it's expensive. Everyone, I can see lots of nodding. I think it could be. I don't know how expensive it is. I know it's not cheap, but is a very uses a whole kind of aggregate of different data sources like social media, all sorts of things, to kind of drill down at different. I think it's around the well-being of a community and that kind of thing. So that's certainly something that you'll get that's not ABS style and also up to the minute. Sorry, Kate.
That's exactly what I was going to say. So you're welcome.
Anyone else on that question? Okay, Des, what else have we got coming through?
All right, so there was a question for those of you who have or are attempting to measure outcomes and not just outputs. From a social impact initiative, did you develop a theory of change or a program logic for the initiative? And if so, how often do you review it and confirm that it's correct? And also, did you seek to validate it internally or externally in any way?
I wish we were that organised, but we did not do that. It's a good reminder.
We did, when I say we, HelloCast is pretty much me. So I just say we to appeal to funders. But yes, the theory of change happens, and then every 6 months I take the canvas and do that. And, but throughout that process, I did discover that what I was doing was less kind of gender-based violence specific and more around augmenting help seeking. So, and that, helps to kind of scale the concept that drives HelloCast to different applications. So what are other ways that people don't access support? So whether it's through mental health or alcohol and drug issues or what have you, wherever there's shame and stigma and that kind of taboo is, so that's kind of how the theory of change canvas has shifted to be less kind of, to be a bit broader.
Anyone else want to come in on that one? All right, I reckon we might have time for probably just about one more. What else have we got through?
Okay, I have one from Siobhan that says, one of the things I struggle with is finding an affordable survey software to track social impact for clients. It often involves collecting personal information. So to comply with the Privacy Act, this needs to be based in Australia. So does anyone on the panel have any suggestions of tools they could use to build their own surveys? And she says she doesn't have any coding experience, so not sure if she's missed any options.
I told you I was quite chatty. I do know that AWS has a data center in Sydney, so that helps you with your privacy issues. I'm not sure what, and I think that's the only one of the big providers that does have a data center based in Australia. I was having a look before I saw that question come through to see if the Typeform uses AWS servers, but I didn't get that far into my multitasking, but Typeform is quite good. But otherwise, yeah, I can do a bit more digging and come back to that question.
Thank you, Emma. And a huge thank you to all of our panelists for sharing with us their experience and their insights today. Really, really appreciate your time. That just about wraps us up for today's webinar event. And I will hand back over to Kathy to sign us out.
Great, thanks Ellie. Yeah, and thanks again to the panelists, so to Emma, Lee, Kyle, Ben and Kate. I thought that was particularly interesting how everyone was talking about getting clear at the front, whether it was an impact model or being clear on what they were doing. But then technology was actually letting you open up, I think, different ways of accessing data, whether it was Ben looking for the trends in his data set, or people spoke a lot about real-time data and data visualization. So I think that that's a really interesting opportunity that is available for people who do focus on tech to solve social problems. So you will be getting a survey link soon. So we would love your feedback to see how we're going. Interestingly, we've shifted our model too. So before we had a lot of in-person events, and now we've moved on to online, which really makes it possible to have everyone across Australia participate, which is fantastic. Also consider becoming a SIMNA member. So if that's of interest to you, there's links on our website. And finally, if you would like to join us again on the 29th of July, we're having a fireside chat with Victoria Baird, who's an impact specialist at Mission Australia. So we would love to see you join us again. And thank you everybody, and particularly to the Western Australian Committee and Lisa for all the work they've done to pull together such a great webinar. And have a lovely afternoon.